We welcome you to the meeting, and if there are members of the public who have joined us, we welcome you as well. I'd like to begin by excusing our Lieutenant Governor. He is in a meeting with the governor and legislative leadership even as we speak. I don't know the subject matter of it, but it's an important meeting, and I suspect it may be related to some of the policy changes with respect to responding to the COVID pandemic. In any event, we'll excuse him. I am advised by our director that because this meeting is being conducted virtually online, as many of our meetings in state government are, that pursuant to law that was enacted earlier in the summer, we need to state the reasons for us conducting business virtually. So I'm going to read an explanation of that that's taken out of the code, and just bear with me, it's not very long, but I'm required to state this information at the beginning of the meeting. As the chairman of the Point of the Mountain Land Authority Board, I've determined that the October 13th, 2020 meeting of the board will be held electronically without an anchor location. This determination is based on the following facts. One, Utah is currently dealing with COVID-19, which has been determined to be a pandemic. COVID-19 is extremely contagious and can be deadly to those who contract it, especially those of advanced age and underlying health conditions. Number two, the agency offices are in Salt Lake County, which is currently in the state's yellow risk category. This limits the size of our public gatherings to fewer than 50 people and requires the wearing of masks and social distancing. People are encouraged to stay in their homes. Number three, a vast majority of the agency staff and the members of the board are teleworking to avoid unnecessary contact with others. Number four, the boardroom is insufficient to allow social distancing and reasonably safe accommodations to the board and for the public. Number five, the board uses an electronic platform which allows interested parties to view the meeting, hear the discussions, and also to provide their own comments. So with that factual basis for conducting business today virtually and via electronic means, we will move forward unless there's any questions of the board members. Kind of remind you, I've got a panel on my screen, but if any of you would like to speak, raise your hand or let me know, and I'll try to call on you. Okay, since we last met, there has been a lot accomplished by the board. We held our press conference. I think most of you were in attendance. We were the subject of some really positive stories on our state's major media. We opened a public survey. We received outstanding ideas from our working groups, and we launched the process to select our master planning firm. All of that has been accomplished. It's hard to believe since we met last, but it has. And Muriel, don't want to single you out, but you've been on the forefront of the media effort, and I think this is a good time to thank you and also congratulate you for helping us maneuver that process and also in our relationships with the media. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, Representative.
So today we're going to get started. One of the highlights is an update on these efforts, including where we are on our efforts to obtain and retain our our planning firm. But before we do that, we'll start with item number 2 on agenda, which is to recognize members of the public who may have joined and also allow them to weigh in and make any comments that they would like to before we move into the formal part, you might say, of our agenda. So if there are members of the public that have joined us and that would like to comment, we will give you that opportunity. And Alan, maybe you can help me keep an eye on any requests that way.
I will.
And this is Sarah Wright. I'll just chime in. I'm here to give a brief presentation on the Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact later on in the agenda. So I'll just stay with my camera off on mute and just let me know when you're ready for me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah, we are really glad to have you here. It's good to see you again, and we're glad that you're taking part on our agenda today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. So I don't see any notice, Alan, from anyone from the public wanting to comment.
I don't either. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Alan. With that, we'll move forward. The next item on the agenda is the approval of our minutes of our last meeting held September 8th. I think you have all been given a copy. You've received a copy. I would entertain a motion to approve those if someone would raise their hand or speak up. Thank you, Jim. Let's unmute you, or if you would unmute yourself and make that motion.
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we accept the meeting minutes. Do we have the date? I don't have that right in front of me.
Motion by Jim is that we approve the minutes. Do I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you, April, for the second. We'll call for a vote. All in favor of that motion, say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. Thank you for that action. So the next item, we'll turn some time to Alan to discuss the authority website policy that's being proposed for you to consider and hopefully adopt today. So Alan, we'll turn the time to you.
Great. Thank you, Representative. So this body, of course, approves policies of the organization, and we've approved a number over the last year. There's one that we wanted to add, and we distributed that to you last week. It's a website privacy policy. And the idea is that this would be appended to our website in a place where those who visit the website could see it. It essentially describes what information we collect from those who visit the website and how that information is used or distributed. It's kind of a typical practice for all websites. This is based on some fairly standard language. It's been reviewed and edited by our legal counsel, Ballard Spahr. And I'll just really briefly give you a summary. Again, this would appear on our website and anybody visiting could find it and read it. But it talks about our website as our service. And so we collect some information from those who visit the website to allow us to improve the visitor experience on the website. We also commit that we will not share any of that information with anyone except as outlined in this policy. So we typically collect some personally identifiable information at times. We might ask people for their names and email addresses. In addition, we'll be collecting some, what's called log data. It's information such as the computer IP address from a visitor, the browser type, the version of the browser, the pages that they visit on our website, the time and date that they visit our website, and some time spent on those pages. So essentially collecting some statistics. All that information is stored subject to the laws of Utah. We also collect cookies, which essentially files that are anonymous, but help us understand how people use the site and how we can improve the user experience on that site. Those who visit are able to go to their browser and refuse to share cookies. We also indicate that sometimes we'll have third parties helping to facilitate the website. X-Factor is an example of that. And so some of the information will be shared with them, but they're obligated not to disclose it for any other purpose. We indicate that we make every reasonable effort to protect the security of the information, but of course nothing is 100% secure, and so we can't guarantee the security of that information. Got an element there that talks about privacy for children. We don't reach out to those under the age of 18, but if we unknowingly were to collect some information from those under 18 and we learned about it, we would delete that information immediately. And of course, we could disclose that information, any information we collect, if it's required for us to comply with the law. And then indicate that from time to time we may change this policy as necessary and post those changes on our website. So that's kind of the overview, and I'd be happy to try to respond to any questions if anyone has them. Okay, as I said, I think
Any questions?
I've got a question, Alan. Maybe
Yes.
I missed it, but do they have to accept these terms before they can view our website, or is this just rules that will be posted on the website for under public notice?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jim. It's the latter. It's like almost any website you go to will have a statement like this, and so you don't need to approve them to begin with, but they're available for anybody to read if they're interested.
Thank you, Jim. Any other questions? Alan, I'm assuming that these are fairly standard, this protocol for independent agencies and boards?
They are, and we started with kind of a standard template, and as I said, had legal counsel review it and make a few tweaks, but we feel comfortable with the policy as written.
Very good. JC, thanks for your help with that. Any other questions from board members on the policy? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve this policy. That's what we need.
So moved. This is Val.
Thank you, Val, for the motion. The motion is that we adopt this proposed policy. Do I have a second? Thank you, Jim Russell, for the second. Any discussion to the motion? I don't see any hands, so we'll call for a vote. All in favor of the motion that we adopt this policy, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Raise your hand or let me know. We'll rule that that motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I did receive a message from Muriel. Thanks, Muriel, for the reminder. She wanted me to remind everyone that this meeting today is being also live streamed on the Point YouTube channel. So Muriel, thank you for helping us set that up. All right, let's go back to the agenda then and move forward. Under our law, every board and commission, and I think even committees of the legislature are required to undergo an annual training on the Open Public Meeting Act and the GRAMA. JC Skinner is here as our legal counsel, and JC will turn the time to you to train us on those issues.
I am on mute. No, I'm not. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you. Very good.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. As Representative Snow mentioned, This is a training that every state entity, board, commission, any kind of public body, which we'll talk about what that means, is required to undergo every year. As I was putting this together and talking with Alan, most of our board members are public officials in one way or another and probably have had this training already this year and for many years. But things do apply a little bit differently to different groups, particularly when it comes to government records. And so we wanted to make sure that we spoke about these things there, particularly for our staff and for members of the public. We also want to make sure that it's very clear how we operate, where those operating rules can be found, and the statutes that those are based on, and so it can provide that kind of predictability so that you know how to engage this group, how it will operate, where information can be found, and helps provide that opportunity to engage. Now, hopefully, I'm going to try to present my screen here, and I've not done this in this particular format before, so let's see. Do you see a PowerPoint presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Because that's what do you see?
Your beautiful face.
So this is a Google format. Can anyone chime in and help JC on this? I'm not familiar with this format.
If it wants to share my screen, I'm
Aaron
sharing
has shared screens before. Maybe Aaron can help us. Wait, it's there now.
It's there now.
It's there now.
You know? Okay, perfect. Great, thank you. Sorry, just everything has, I think there was one button I did not complete with, so we're off to a great start. All right, just to walk us through here, so as was mentioned again, we're required to have this training every year. And I'm not usually one for cartoons, but I do appreciate this particular element here where we talk about the purpose of the Open Public Meetings Act and Government Records Management Act. The purpose really is to provide some transparency to government actions, to take actions openly and to conduct deliberations openly. And particularly with those entities, as we talk about what a public body is, those public bodies are groups, whether they're administrative, advisory, executive, legislative, whatever it may be, if they're created by the Constitution, by state statute, by rule, by ordinance. So there's something formally creating them. And they're either supported in whole or in part by tax dollars, and they are vested with the authority to make decisions regarding the public's business. So obviously our body here meets every one of these elements. And given the type of undertaking that we are going to engage in, as our leadership of this group has repeatedly stated, they want to make sure that this is a very open, transparent process that involves input from the public, and that the public and state leadership is very aware of what's going on at all times. I should say, if anyone has any questions at any point, please feel free to ask them at any point in time, and I'm happy to answer those as we go along. Questions often come up about what actually falls into the category of a meeting. So again, we've determined we're a public body. A convening of a meeting is any time when you have a quorum present, and the purpose of that meeting is to discuss the business of that group, to receive public comment, or to take action on that group. It doesn't mean a social gathering or convening of a public body somewhere else. That purpose is not to receive specific and to make specific decisions. So I was like, to give an example, there are some entities, decision-making bodies, judicial type entities in the state, like the tax commission or the Board of Pardons and Parole. They're very small. That the purpose of those meetings is not to discuss or make decisions on public matters. In order to make sure that this happens, and to make sure that the public has ample opportunity to participate in these meetings and to provide comment and to know what's going on, the statute requires that we give public notice. The notice must be given at least 24 hours in advance, and it has to specify the time, date, and place of this meeting. The agenda, the notice, has to be posted in several places. So it has to be posted, and this we'll talk about this a little bit more, but in this current environment where meetings are electronic, this next section doesn't really apply, but typically you would post the location of the meeting. Now, if a meeting's taking place at the Capitol, for instance, there is a public meeting board where you can see all of those meetings that are coming up. But it also can be posted on and has to be posted on the Utah Public Notice website. Bodies are also supposed to provide that notice to a newspaper or local media correspondent, although I will say, I'll put a little asterisk next to that. If you are complying with the requirements of the Utah Public Notice website, they provide that access so that bodies themselves do not need to make that part of that publication that happens there. This meeting, for instance, if you were to go to the Utah Public Meeting website, you would find, and you were to register for notices from the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, you would get notice of this meeting, the agenda of that meeting. It would tell you if you wanted to participate electronically, how you can do that, or physically where the meeting will be taking place. It will also tell you how you can provide input if there were any special requirements for that. But that is the requirement there. As part of that, the agenda obviously must be posted. And the agendas in these instances are not just advisory documents, but they must include every topic that the body will consider. Now, when we say consider, it's not just anything that they may talk about, but consider means something that they're intend to take action on, or to deliberate in a way that may lead to action. So if there is something, and you heard Alan mention, or Representative Snow mention at the beginning of this meeting, that we needed a quorum present before we could talk about certain things that we needed to vote on, but perhaps before we could talk about things that didn't need a vote. So that's how those agendas work, but it is very important that the public know what they can consider. A public body can discuss issues that are raised by the public that are not listed on the agenda, but they can't take any final action on that. So when we move to public comment, or we have public comment, someone can bring up a topic. This body can respond to that and have a discussion about it. But if they intend to take any further action on it, we'd have to notice it on an agenda for a future meeting, and then follow all of those requirements of 24-hour notice and posting. The meeting itself must have a quorum present in order to vote, as we talked about. You can only vote on noticed action items. And just by general good practice, discussion should be held in the committee of any item before any final proposal is brought to the board. That there can be times where discussions are foregone, that votes just take place, and people are left wondering, how did they reach that conclusion? And so that element of just procedural due process, always good practice to make sure that there is some discussion related to those things that we're voting on. I am going to pause here. Are there any questions from anyone?
Yeah, I do have a question. How do you know which media groups have actually subscribed to your listing on the Open Public website?
That's a good question. I have never done that, and I should. I believe you could contact the public meeting website, the administrators of that. It's housed with archives and with Department of Administrative Services. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they can tell you who is subscribed to your list.
Okay, then we know if we were covered. All righty, thanks.
Of course. I will double check that answer. That's my guess, my best guess.
So JC, I've got a little question on that.
Uh-huh.
We moved away from we used to put all our public notice in the newspaper, and we don't do that anymore. We made our public notice our website. Is there a chance that placing it on the Point website would take placement of the newspaper? If that's our official point of notification.
If that's our official point of notification. The statute does specifically say that you have to provide that notice, and provides a mechanism by which the public notice website will do that for you. But that is a really good question, whether that provides adequate notice. My initial response would be no, that's not sufficient, just given the specifics in the statute, but it may be something worth visiting. I will say, and I don't mean this to be critical of the statute, but any of you who have followed the Open Public Meetings Act statute or the Government Records statute over the years, you will see that most of these were written in a time that is not now. And a lot of the electronic advancements and virtual meeting opportunities and website notifications just weren't part of the process at the time. And we often find things that can be updated to be more applicable to today's current environment and the way that people currently find information. So as I said, the statute does specifically require that, but it may be something worth visiting, but I will also go back and double check that for you and let you know.
So JC,
Yes.
if they're subscribed to our postings on the Open Public website, does that mean they're posting our meetings or that they're just aware of them?
When you say they, who do you mean they?
The media.
The media? If they're subscribing,
Mm-hmm.
I would interpret that to mean that they may choose to attend and that they're following the business that's taking place. So not necessarily that they will report on it or that they're posting it elsewhere. Each media outlet would treat that differently. But in my experience, those media outlets who subscribe to particular public bodies tend to be those that are following the business of those bodies and want to make sure that they are following those meetings and checking the agendas to see if there is anything that may be of interest to them.
Okay.
Any other questions in that regard? We may, and you all know this, and we do this routinely in this group, but to talk about this, a public body may close a public meeting to discuss items. There are very rare instances where you're actually required to do it, but it is best practice in many instances to close a meeting. I've provided some examples. This is not an exhaustive list. The exhaustive list of items for which a meeting can be closed can be found in 52.4.205. And it's quite a long list of reasons why a meeting can be closed. Some of the most applicable to our group would be to discuss a person's character, competence, or health, pending or imminent litigation, matters regarding the acquisition or sale of real estate, property, water rights, shares, things along those lines, security personnel issues that could cause some security problems if discussed outside, or the investigation of alleged criminal conduct. Again, the list is more expansive, but you will notice that when you do close a meeting, how you do it is that the public body can only do it if they have the vote of 2/3 of a quorum, and that they announce specifically the reason why the meeting is going to be closed. So you'll notice whenever we close a meeting, Representative Snow will read off a little statement, and he'll specifically cite this provision of the Open Public Meetings Act and say why we're closing the meeting. And that we have the authority to do so, and will we take an actual vote to do that before we go into that closed meeting. Once the group is in a closed meeting, they can discuss that issue, but it is important that they stick to just that issue. Just because you're in a closed meeting doesn't mean that you can then bring up things that you didn't want to discuss with the public present. It must be certified, and in fact, at the end of that meeting, the chair is actually required to certify that the discussion was contained with that particular topic that we closed the meeting for. So you may hear when we're in closed meetings where someone may very innocently try to, ask another question, and you may hear the chair or your lawyer from time to time say, we need to make sure that we stick with this particular topic. The public body must then vote to reopen the meeting. There are recordings of these meetings that do exist. They are kept separately from the public meeting, so the person helping to administer the meeting or do the mechanics of the meeting should make sure to stop the recording and restart the recording so that there is a definite break there. And those recordings can only be made public by court order, but they do exist. The public body must then, once they vote to come back into an open meeting, must then vote to approve anything that came as a recommendation for the meeting. So again, you'll notice we'll talk about something in a closed meeting, come back, your chair or someone will then make a motion about what that recommendation was, and the body will then vote on that. Just something to note that the information discussed in a closed meeting is confidential for a reason. And those who participate in that closed meeting should keep that information confidential as well. Any questions about closed meetings? I know those can be a bit of a mystery to people sometimes. If not, as you know, and the first thing we did in this meeting was approve minutes from our last meeting. A public body must keep written minutes and a recording. The only exception to that is if you're on a site tour and there's no vote that's being taken. So for instance, if we were to go and tour the property at the point of the mountain, we wouldn't be required, as long as we weren't taking any official action, we would not need to record that or keep minutes from that. The minutes and recording for the people who are staffing these committees can be a little bit onerous. Draft minutes must be made available to the public within 30 days. The recording must be posted within 3 days, and then approved minutes. So for instance, the minutes we approved today and any meeting materials that were distributed in association with those minutes must be available to the public within 3 days of approval. Electronic meetings, you'll notice I have here in normal circumstances and not normal circumstances. Typically, electronic meetings are allowed for public bodies. You just have to have a policy that dictates when you can have an electronic meeting. And we have one here. Typically, what that would entail is that we would hold an electronic meeting, but we must have an anchor location. So you'd normally meet somewhere in person where the public could show up and make comment if they wanted to, but your members could participate remotely if that was necessary. And you would need to include the method and the details of that electronic communication in the agenda. In not normal circumstances, which is where we are now, we originally saw an executive order from the governor that waived that requirement for an anchor location. Because this has gone on longer than anticipated, and I think because the legislature anticipated that this may be something that could be needed again in the future, there is a new provision which Representative Snow very well demonstrated for us at the beginning of this meeting, is that the chair makes a written determination that the meeting with an anchor location would present a risk to the health and safety of the public, and states the reasons for that decision, and that information is again provided to the public. That lasts for 30 days, so if we were to do this with our next board meeting as well, that finding would have to be made again. Any questions about electronic meetings? I think we've all become quite expert at them right now. There is again a provision for emergency meetings, which means that a public body can hold an emergency meeting without 24 hours notice. Now, this is not in an effort to circumvent the requirements of public notice, but truly in an emergency type situation, the public body can hold an emergency meeting. It needs to attempt to notify the public as well as possible, and it must notify or make efforts to notify all the members of the public body to approve the meeting. So you can't just let those members of your body that you think are going to vote the way that you want know about it and hold a meeting quickly. Otherwise, it must follow the procedure as closely as possible. Penalties for violation of this act, it is a law and it is intended to be followed. So intentions can be serious. It is a Class B misdemeanor for a body or someone to knowingly and intentionally violate the closed meeting provisions. So that is something to keep in mind. A Class B misdemeanor is punishable by up to 6 months in jail. So it's not a inconsequential penalty. Additionally, any final action that is taken in a meeting that did not follow the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act could be voidable by the court. It doesn't mean that it's automatically voidable, but it could be voidable by the court. So just very important to keep in mind these provisions and make sure that we comply with them. To move quickly to the Government Records Management Act, as we all refer to as GRAMA here in the state, the federal corollary is FOIA, but the state records are governed by the State Government Records Management Act. It's found in Title 63G of Utah Code, and it defines what records are and what records are public and which records are not public. And because this is a public body, records of this body do fall under the management of this particular act. So a record is very broadly defined. It's a record book, or excuse me, a book, record, letter, document, paper, map, plan, photograph, recording any documentary material regardless of its form or characteristics. This includes text messages, this includes emails, it can include, in some instances, voicemails. I mean, there are lots of things that can fall in this category. The provision there is that it's prepared, owned, received, or retained by a governmental entity, and where all the information in the original is reproducible by photocopy or other mechanical or electronic means. We bring this up to keep in mind that as members of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority Board, you are a part of a public body for those purposes. Our communications are public records and do need to be managed and governed under this act. For those of you who are public officials, many of you are very used to this. For those of you who aren't, this can be something that can be new and just something to keep in mind. We'll go through a few of these things, but I've advised governmental entities on this for a long time, and I've responded to media requests in government records, requests of many forms, and those from private citizens for a long time. And I will just say, just by way of advice to this group, that rarely do we see someone in a records request something that shows that someone has engaged in any kind of wrongdoing or anything along those lines. What I do see and what has caused people the most heartache and has been the most painful is people who become a little careless with their conversations, who may say disparaging things or snide things or inappropriate things in emails that then become public and their content is not protected. We'll talk about what something is protected or not, but those things can become public. So, as we talk about the media, and I know some of them are here on the call, my advice to anyone who works for a public entity is to make sure that you never put anything in writing that you would not want to see on the front page of the newspaper or as a headline. Just by way of records here, the classifications, there are several different types of records. There are public records, private records, controlled records, and protected records. Each of those have a little bit different meaning and reason why they fall into those categories. But if most records are considered to be public records, unless they are classified as private, controlled, or protected. And what makes those records fall into those categories are very well defined within statute. When someone is requesting public records, the responding entity, anything that they don't respond with, they must very specifically say why something was withheld and show why it was classified as a private record, a controlled record, or a public record, protected record. I will note that in this, for our legislators on the call or on our board, their legislative communications are considered protected in a different way than other public bodies are. And so just something to keep in mind. I've seen that over the years where legislators may, because their internal communications or communications with their constituents may be protected in a certain way, protect participation on other kinds of boards or communications with other governmental entities are not. So just something to keep in mind and the different capacities that we work through. Talk about this here, just what makes something a record. I think it's important to know it's not so much the format that makes it a record, but the content. It is whether or not you are conducting public business, which is the test there for what makes something a record. Penalties for not complying with the Government Records Management Act are similar to the Open Public Meetings Act, but they fall into a couple different categories. I think the two that are relevant to this group is any public employee or public entity or person who has access lawfully to a private, controlled, or protected record. So something that is classified as protected, and I'll use that broadly. And knowing that information is guilty of misdemeanor. So that is something to be careful of. These documents are protected for a particular reason, whether it's to protect trade secrets, whether it's to protect personal information of the public or private individuals, whatever it may be, that is protected for a reason. And so we need to be sensitive and cognizant of that. The second provision there is that any public employee, and again, public entity, who intentionally refuses to release a record after they've been ordered to disclose it is also guilty of a Class 2 misdemeanor. That is the bulk of our presentation there. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has them. Hopefully my screen will stop sharing now. No,
Any
still sharing.
questions?
Here we go.
JC, thank you very much. We appreciate your counsel and your guidance on this issue and on the work that we do. Let me just say this, just take a little prerogative and maybe editorialize a little bit. We have talked a little bit in our on our board about the importance of doing our work before the public. We're engaged in the people's business, and I know sometimes when we get involved, we can start to forget who we work for or on whose behalf we're engaging the work of this commission on, or this body on. This is a good reminder of why we are transparent, why we keep records, and the policy behind that is that our business is really the public's business, the taxpayers' business. And so this requirement is not only good from a technical standpoint, but it's a good reminder too on whose behalf we work. So thanks again, JC. And unless there are any questions now for JC, we'll move to the next item on the agenda. Some of you we're now at item 6, the Utah Climate Change and Clean Air Compact. Some of you may have noticed in the news this last week that several prominent Utah organizations and citizens have joined together and introduced the Utah Climate Change and Clean Air Compact. The sponsors of that work asked to present the compact to our board. And we're excited, really happy to have Sarah Wright, who is the Executive Director of Utah Clean Energy. And Utah Clean Energy was a major sponsor, if not the sponsor, of that compact. They asked for time before our board to present the compact. And you'll notice on your agenda that this is an action item. They are asking for our authority to become a signer of the compact. So with that, Sarah, if I've stated the background correctly, we'll turn the time to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Representative Snow. So as a little bit of correction, we have a steering committee for the Utah Climate and Clean Air Compact. And I'll look over here, 2 screens, it's a little, which Scott Anderson, Kim and Christian Gardner, Pat Jones, Greg Miller, Tom Love, and myself with Utah Clean Energy. And so we started working together a couple years ago because we understand that many Utahns are very concerned about both air quality and climate, but there isn't a concerted, conversation moving forward. In fact, when you look at polls, 70% of the public is concerned about climate change, but about 1/3 of those even talk about it. So if you're not talking about an issue, you can't look to solutions. So over the couple years, we did some educational events and then looked at what Utah did on the Immigration Compact, where we were the first conservative state to come forward with a compassionate and pragmatic response to immigration and refugees. And then we were the first conservative state to pass a anti-discrimination law. And now we think that we can be the first conservative state that engages in pragmatic discussions around climate and air quality solutions. Can I share my screen? Is that let's see if I can do that. Let me just see if I can.
You should be able to.
Window. Well, I'm not. I think I'll share this one, and then go to. Can you see my screen now?
We can't see it yet, Sarah.
Okay, I don't know if I did the right thing. Share. Oh, maybe I don't like system preferences. Okay.
Oh.
Sorry to eat up your time with technology.
Anyone able to jump in and help her with the Google format?
I think that has to do with my different monitors. It might have to do with my internal permissions. Maybe I'll share my entire screen. Okay, so we'll try that.
Sarah, we're getting it now, I think.
Okay, great. But it's not playing.
It's looks like it's starting, but
Oh, really?
Welcome, everybody, to today's
You're in
amazing
the wrong.
event.
I am not. I'll share. What I'm going to do is just share the compact. I was going to share a little video of all the signatories of the compact. It's some of you were there, and it was a pretty. We launched last week on October 7th with a keynote from Thomas Friedman and some remarks from Congressman Curtis and Congressman McAdams and Senator Romney. And do you see the compact in front of you now?
yes.
Okay. So the compact is it's a one-page document, and if you want to go to the page, if you go to the Climate and Clean Air Compact, and it's really about, I'll tell you what it isn't. It isn't a policy platform that says, you know, we're coming together and we think that this is the solution to climate and clean air. What it is that it's a platform with leaders coming together to say, we understand that climate and clean air are significant issues, and that we call upon our community leaders and businesses to take action. And we adopt the mileposts of the Utah Roadmap, Positive Solutions for Climate and Clean Energy, or Clean Air, or Climate and Air Quality. And the reason we adopted the mileposts and not the recommendations is because we didn't want to say specifically this is what we should be doing, but we thought that if we looked in terms of the types of strategies that will improve both air quality and address climate change, the roadmap laid those out really well. So it's not a policy platform, it's more of a platform that we want to come together and work on solutions. And it's always, for one reason or another, addressing climate impacts and climate risk and climate solutions has become a partisan issue. And the steering committee and many of the compact signers believe that Utah can really be the caring, conservative, and compassionate state that moves beyond rhetoric and comes together on productive conversations to move solutions. I don't know if there are any questions so far on, it addresses rural Utah, that we need to prioritize economic development, that we would do it in the Utah way and think about, quality growth, fiscal responsibility, those types of things. Our economy and looking ahead to the bid for the Olympics, and the health and well-being of Utah now and in the future. I'll switch over to the signatories. I'll just give a screenshot of the signatories. Congressman Curtis signed, Congressman McAdams. Do you want me to just scroll through these so that you can see who signed on, or I could do that while you ask questions?
Any questions for Sarah? I believe some of our board members are original signatories, including Representative Handy, Mayor Ramsey, and if I've missed anyone, you can speak up.
We feel that this is really part of moving forward with sort of Utah. And plus, as we move forward on, depending on what happens in the next election, there might be action on the federal front on climate. And we think it's really important that Utahns have a productive seat at the table of any federal policy as well.
All right. Any questions or comments from the board about the presentation or about the compact?
Yeah,
Steve, you want to join in?
Yes, I do. Let me just say something. Thanks, Lowry. Yeah, I was very, very pleased to be one of the early signatories of the compact. And when you get time, any of you can do it. Go and review hear this talk from Thomas Friedman. It was really amazing, wasn't it, Sarah? It was really terrific. It was really visionary and lots of great thinking. Representative Chair Snow, if you're those are my comments, but if you want to come back to me, I'd like to make a motion as part of this action.
We'll make sure and come back. We'll make sure and come back to you for that, Representative. I want to give Mayor Ramsey, if she's on, who was also one of the originals. Would you care to speak to it, Mayor? I think you're muted right now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. Thank you. I know I appreciate that. And thank you for the words that Representative Handy just shared, because
we can just barely hear you, Dawn. If you could speak up just a little bit more.
Tell me, is that better? Does that help?
That's better.
Okay. I appreciate Representative Handy's remarks, and I agree. I think this is an important thing, and air quality is such a concern in this valley, and it's one of the major issues that will be addressed with this. I think it's something that as we continue to grow, we need to work together on these solutions, and I was really honored to be one of the initial signatories on this as well, and look forward to working together as a state and doing it the Utah way. We tend to do things a little different here, and we do them well. We work together. This is not a partisan issue. This is a humanity issue, and I look forward to great progress in the future as we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So with that, we'll go back to Representative Handy. Before I turn it to you, just reminding the board that it's on the agenda to consider our board itself joining the compact. So with that, we'll turn it to you, Representative Handy.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair Snow, and to all of you. I move that we, as the board of the Point of the Mountain State Land Authority, that we join the compact as signatories, and that's my motion, and I'd like to speak to that if I could.
That is appropriate. Go ahead and speak to the motion.
Yeah, I think this is really terrific. When you just go back a few weeks ago to our amazing press conference, we talked very directly about the environmental aspects of the development, and from the get-go on the land authority, the authority, we have talked about the environmental aspects of this. I wanted to say that there have been some in the Utah roadmap that Sarah referenced, that most of you are aware of, that I think it's point number 3. It talks about the creation of a world-class climate and premier air quality lab. And I know that there have been some preliminary discussions going on about that. Alan's been privy to that with the Gardner Institute, also with the Department of Environmental Quality and air quality as well. And so some things are moving like that. I actually have a bill, I think some of you know, that calls for a feasibility study. So when we get to we'll see how far the market-based study gets, led by Tom Holst and the Gardner Institute, but then we'll get out there to the session and we'll see what we need to do for a feasibility study. But I think this is just very, very common sense. And if that could ever happen, that the air quality lab could be sited at Point of the Mountain, it would be really a tremendous asset to everything else we're doing. So those are my comments. Thank you.
This is April. I have a couple questions. Can anyone share with me, instead of just broad general terms, what the compact is very specific things. Like, let's say we were selling like a 10 or 20 or 30 acre parcel to a company. Is there a limitation on how many cars they can bring in? Is it going to cost them more money? Is it going to cost the taxpayers more money as opposed to the companies that we're recruiting? Can anyone tell me specifically if we join? And I think in broad terms, the concept sounds amazing, but what do we actually need to do? And what kind of restrictions does this on us? And what kind of cost would possibly go to the taxpayers or to people that are coming in there?
Alan, do you want me to answer that?
Please.
So the roadmap doesn't adopt any specific policies. It adopts, the compact, and then which adopts the mileposts of the roadmap. There aren't specific policies that it says you will do X, Y, and Z. It does say that it recommends that the state adopt some emission reduction goals that then we work towards. It doesn't say a requirement for these goals or that these goals would be set in stone, but it's something to work towards. It has the second milepost is lead by example, and that the point of the mountain development is the perfect example of leading by example. Talks about the next one is to look at creating the air quality and changing climate solutions laboratory. And then it talks about accelerating quality growth efforts, but it doesn't have requirements like a lot has to be this size or has to be right next to transit, but it does encourage looking at quality growth. And EV, position Utah, I'm just reading through the mileposts, so I'll go through each one. Position Utah as a market-based EV state, which is using market principles to drive more zero-emission vehicles, and then the economic transition assistance to rural communities, and then to also take part in the national dialogues about market-based approaches to reduce carbon emissions. So there aren't any specific requirements on what should be done, but it does kind of push in the direction of where the types of things that we would want to work towards. So just as the point is looking at different requirements for or how they'll structure the RFP and the development guidelines, that could be in line with these mileposts, but no requirements to do any one individual thing.
Okay, but like an example of something we could offer would be like, let's say there's companies coming in there and we're encouraging them in their parking lot that like 20% of the spaces that they put like an electric charger, or things like where we maybe encourage so that it turns the tide of what the people that are going down there do, so it changes behavior.
Exactly, that's a great example. Or maybe you'll give some sort of variance if they have less parking spaces and more mass transit. But it's not a requirement. There's nothing in the compact that sets any policy. It sets a direction and it sets a course.
Okay, so just for the record, I think it's great. I just wanted to understand a little bit more about it. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you for those good questions.
Thank you, April. Thank you, Sarah. And JC, don't want to put you on the spot, but am I accurate? If the board adopts this or joins as a signer, there's nothing about this action that would somehow bind the development of the point or the project. Is this more aspirational?
Sarah, I think, hit on the most important point there, is that they adopt some guideposts, but not the specific. Am I saying that right? The roadmap has the guideposts, but not the specific goals within them. Those are within the report that the Gardner Institute published. So there are some very specific things in there, but this compact doesn't bind anyone to them. It's just working together to try to help accomplish those goals.
Thank you. And you'll forgive me for putting you on the spot, but you did.
I forget.
Any other, Representative Handy, I didn't get a second to your motion. We probably should have had that before we decided. That's okay.
I'll second.
Thanks, April. So April will second the motion. Further discussion on the motion that's before us.
This is Dawn. I just wanted to thank April for her questions. I think those were really good questions, and thank you to Sarah and JC for your answers. We do want to make sure that we're clear and everybody understands what this is and what it isn't. So thank you for that clarification.
Thank you, Mayor Ramsey. Further discussion on the motion? We'll call for a vote. Those in favor of the authority adopting this compact as it's been discussed and presented, please say aye or raise your hand in the affirmative.
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And so, Sarah, we are honored to be able to join as a board authority as part of this compact. And I just want to say, in my opinion, it is entirely consistent with the legislation that created the authority. So we appreciate you coming and presenting today and asking for our support.
Well, my pleasure, and excited to have you on board with the compact. And I will say that if there are any of you individuals in your other roles in the community that would like to sign on, please reach out. We're still bringing on new signatories. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's move on to item number 7 on the agenda. This is kind of an exciting part of our agenda. This is an update on our planning firm solicitation and response to those solicitation requests. As I think everyone will recall, we issued an RFQ seeking firms to develop a master plan for the point. And I understand that we've had a really good response from several prominent firms. The process now is to narrow the field of the candidate firms. And Stephen Kellenberg, our consultant, has been a major player in this process up to this point. And so, Steve, we'll turn the time to you to update us on this process.
Thank you very much. Yes, it has been fairly intensive process. You know, the first step was actually writing a request for qualifications, which we did with DFCM. Jim and his folks. Matt Boyer was instrumental in that at DFCM, and we put together a really good request for qualifications. It went out to a group of about 20 firms that were kind of identified as being kind of leaders in this particular type of planning, but yet it was a completely public and open, and it was open to anybody who wanted to submit. And in fact, you know, a number of the ones that we thought might submit did not, and there were several that we didn't know might that did. And so it's kind of a nice mix. We are in the process of, and let me go ahead and share my screen, and if I can, let's see if I do a window. Can I do that? Let's see. Let's try this, and let's try this.
Looks like it's coming up, Steve.
Do you have a screen with a bunch of names on it?
We do.
Yeah, so we had 12 respondents that came in, and this is really an excellent group of firms. I know all of them except one, which is kind of a younger, newer firm, which I was not familiar with. First 40 Feet. All the rest are well known. They've been around. They have outstanding portfolios of work. The average submission was probably about 25 or 35 pages. So then there were 12 of them. So the selection committee of 6 folks that Alan can talk about in a second, but has received all of these qualification packages. And Matt at DFCM has established a very clear and concise evaluation matrix with a number of points for primarily 3 different categories of qualifications. The first being each firm had to submit at least 5 projects that were similar in character, and so the first sort of evaluation tranche is actually a very due diligent analysis of those by DFCM and talking to their clients and getting actual references from the clients on their 5 projects. And so that is, and that'll be quantitatively summarized. The second is the key key vision elements that the working groups developed. A number of those, it was some at a summary level, were provided in the request for qualifications. And one of the questions was, or one of our criteria is, to what extent did these firms sort of respond to those key vision elements? They all did, but there was a very wide level of response. You know, some basically said, yeah, those are great. You know, we know how to deal with all of those. Others, you know, wrote profusely, you know, about each one and how they saw them and how they related to the projects that they were submitting as examples. So that's an important metric. And then the third metric is the actual projects themselves, and to what extent do those projects end up, you know, aligning with, I'm going to stop sharing here, aligning with, you know, the key vision elements, as well as just the scale of the project, you know, the location. And then there are sort of peripheral questions that you know, we're thinking about. You know, have they worked in Utah, you know, before? Of the projects that they've submitted, how many? You know, the economic development and innovation has, you know, seems to have kind of bubbled to the top as being, you know, there are multiple goals, you know, for this project, but if one were to be sort of a hot headliner, you know, I think that is one of them. And so, you know, how many of them have actually worked on innovation hubs and innovation districts around the country or around the world? And a number of them have, and some of them haven't, you know, so that becomes kind of an interesting differentiator for us. So right now, this week, we are meeting to the committee and DFCM will be summarizing all of our point findings and totals on these different categories. And we'll be meeting this week and comparing the findings, and out of that, a recommendation should be coming forthwith.
Thank you, Steve. Questions of the members for Steve about the process, or are we going to turn some time to Alan as well? Maybe let's take any questions for Steve first, and then Alan, you may want to comment. Well, I have a question for you, Steve, with respect to those organizations, those entities that you had on the list, and I think you were familiar with most of them, only I think shy of one. Would you characterize these as regional or national firms? Can you give us some idea of the credibility, you might say, of those that we received responses from?
I mean, they all are, you know, credible firms based on the projects that they've submitted and the commissions they've received, and there is kind of a hierarchy there. You know, I mean, you have, you know, firms like SOM, Sasaki, you know, HOK, Gensler are kind of the big boys. You know, I mean, they were truly international firms. They have offices all around the world. Most of them probably have been around for half a century. You know. And really are what we call the kind of the iconic, you know, firms, you know, in the country, and also iconic sort of internationally. And then there's kind of a little bit of a second tier, which are also national firms who work all over the country and also do some international work. Probably don't have quite the depth and the heritage that the big guys do. And then there's a couple in there that are, I would say, a little bit more regional, smaller scale. And one of them clearly a boutique firm, you know, that doesn't have the, you know, hundreds of employees that the others have. And, you know, I think, you know, that, and to me, that's all interesting, but it's not definitive. I mean, it's not, you know, you can have a big firm. I worked for a firm that, you know, was one of the largest firms in the world. You know, to me, it didn't make it any better. You know, it just made it. It was just really big. So
Sure.
I think the process that DFCM is set up is nuanced enough that I think we can sort of filter through all of that, you know, and find the team and the group that is really, and keep in mind, our recommendation is not for a firm at this stage. Our recommendation is for 6 firms, 5 or 6 firms that we think are, you know, sort of that have risen above the others. So really, it's really, if we have picked 6 firms out of 12, it's really half, right? So
Right.
And then those 5 or 6 firms will then go into a interview process. And that's really important, because when I look at the team makeup on these firms, I know some of these people. I know a number of them just because I've been around so long and bumped into them. But you know, what's really interesting is, you know, when you get them in the room or the virtual room, if you will, and they actually talk, and that you learn a lot. You know, some will be deeper and more intellectually sort of engaged and knowledgeable than others, and we'll have a set of key questions ready to go that will be the same for all of the firms, and that will give us a good metric for sort of comparing the depth of knowledge and the depth of thinking on each of the firms. And then of course that process takes us to 3, and then we go to our second stage of our process.
Sure.
Which is a little bit of a competitive exercise.
And so one more question. Maybe you can't tell at this stage, but do you have any sense, or are you able to gauge at all, given the response, whether there's interest in this project, or gauge the level of interest?
Oh, I think there's a high interest. I mean, we didn't get, you know, we didn't get 40 responses or 30 or 20. You know, we got 12, which means that there was a process that these firms were going through, that, you know, they were self-selecting themselves, and a number of them self-selected themselves out.
Sure.
And part of that might have been looking at the budget, you know, because the budget is good. It's a good budget, but it's not a stupendous budget, and we're asking them to do a lot. So there could be a little bit of that. There could have been the fact that they saw there was so many others that might be, you know, coming into this, that they just, and the firms right now are very busy too. And it could be that they felt they weren't qualified. So no, I think there's a robust interest and a sufficient interest for us to end up with a really good final outcome here.
Great. I've said it before, but I'll say it again, Steve. We appreciate the talent and the expertise you bring to the process a great deal. With that, unless there are other questions for Steve, Alan, any comments from you on the process thus far?
Yes, and I think Steve covered it very well. I'll just mention, so you're aware, we've got a 6-person team to go through to serve as the selection committee. 4 are internal and 2 are outside. Those internally include a couple of our board members, April and Jim. Thank you very much for agreeing to participate. Steve and I are on that group. Then from the outside, we've asked Christina Oliver, who's the Community Development Director for Draper, and Wilf Summercorn, who is a longtime planner in our region, now retired, but Wilf was the head of Davis County Economic Development. He was the planning director for Salt Lake City. He was the regional planning director for Salt Lake County, and has been involved in the legislature. So I think we've got a good group. I really appreciate the input, because this is not an easy process. As Steve said, if you've got 12 firms all submitting dozens and dozens of pages, and when you give them a page limit, they tend to write as small as possible. So we got a lot of text that we have to strain our eyes over. But I feel good about the group that's stepped forward. I think we've got some good candidates, and we'll be able to get a solid planning team out of this process.
Thank you, Alan. Unless I see any hands or any other questions for Alan or Steve. Oh, Jim.
I was just going to say to your first question, Representative Snow, we would consider all of these national firms because they're not based in Utah, but I'm just looking at the proposals, and 7 of these are fairly familiar, that we're familiar with, that work with our local architects all the time. So it's a pretty good group, though, it looks to me like.
Good.
And
Thanks, Jim.
Representative, if I can jump in, I've just got to add the thanks that Steve provided to Jim and his team at DFCM. They've been outstanding and put in a lot of work in developing the RFQ and this process and evaluating the feedback we provided. And just kudos to Jim and Matt Boyer and his team. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
I'll pass that on to Matt and the gang. Thanks.
We appreciate that. So now let's move to the next item on the agenda. Our other consultant, Aaron, is with us. And Aaron, thank you for not only joining us today, but you're with us for all of our meetings. We'll turn the time to you for an update as to where we are and how we're proceeding.
Great. Thank you, Representative Snow. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll keep my comments brief because I think that our team's work on the real estate and the economic side is very much in process. I'll share just a few slides with you guys today. I think that will be really helpful to give you a sense of what the conversation is going to be like going forward, and the places in which we'll really be asking for this group's input and be bringing ideas and thoughts and evaluations, and also how it's really going to start to interact with this planning consultant that will be on board probably sooner than we realize. And that becomes, I think, a very important piece of the puzzle, is to really have that iterative back and forth with a plan. The planning team with Steve, with Alan, with others, with the sub-consultants that will come with it. And, we're just going to talk through maybe what I would characterize as a framework for development today, to give you guys a quick sense of some things to be thinking about and nibbling on, over the next month based on our work. And, I think I've, just to give you a quick update on the schedule, we talked last time about the idea that what we're really moving into is, taking the economic development and the organizational pieces that we've talked about over the last couple of board meetings and translating them into a business plan, right? Understanding how are we going to fund the organization, how much revenue might be generated, how are we going to interact with other people on site. And while we've had the luxury of the summer being able to be very focused on those pieces in isolation, this becomes just a very collective and iterative process where everything is kind of speaking to each other over time. And our work will provide some input into the master planning process and the design competition up front. And then it will be informed by the master planning, which will, thinking about how we revise and use that information, which will then, inform some of the future planning decisions. So it becomes just a very, back and forth process that, over the lifetime of development is, going to continue, although maybe not on this monthly format. And so I'm just going to start with a couple of points that I think might be helpful for those of you who spend a little less time with this type of real estate development. And I think that there's a couple big ideas to keep in mind here, and we're going to get into these ideas in a lot more detail over the next several months, especially once the planners joined us. But there's kind of 2 types of development activity you're going to see here. One is horizontal development, which is land development, right? How do we get the site ready to go? How do we put in infrastructure? How do we put in utilities? And that's something that's a little bit unique from just every other development that you see around, the Plains of the Mountain area, where somebody can kind of get a site that already has access, and maybe they do a little bit of site work, but they largely get to just put up a building. And that's going to lead to the ability to do vertical development, right, which is actual building construction. And I'm not saying this piece to put a damper on our party, because I think we've got a really good party about to start, but horizontal development is expensive. And, you know, the site will realize its maximum value after the infrastructure is in place. So, you know, just keeping that in mind, the master plan is really going to help us think about what are the infrastructure needs, you know, and order of magnitude, how much do they cost. You know, we're working on the question of how much, you know, how much is the land actually worth and how much variance is that depending on different scenarios. You know, and you can start to just think through the idea that, you know, while we've got 700 acres, it, you know, you break it up into pieces pretty quickly, you know, and it's a lot of development, but it's certainly not infinite. You know, and so, you know, we're really thinking through, you know, several different potential development scenarios, you know, which will change over time. You know, the READL characterizes all market-driven outcomes. You know, right? It's a market-driven outcome to decide to sell the site or decide to sell pieces of the site. You know, it's a market-driven outcome to really do a detailed master plan and, you know, think through how you might retain, you know, or lease parts of the site, or how you might use it for, you know, anchors, or, you know, and, you know, how those anchors contribute to, you know, the broader public benefits as well as the broader value of the site. And so, you know, we think of these as a range of market-driven outcomes, right? It's not that one's market-driven, one's catalytic, or one's, you know, publicly led. You know, these are all outcomes that we can get from the market today. And what that eventually tells us, right, is how we think about the value of the site, which is kind of, you take a real bottom-up approach to, you know, business planning. The first input is really understanding, you know, the eventual things that might get built, you know, and then thinking about what it takes to build them. And you guys will probably see this graphic and others, you know, later on, but in an ideal world, right, you basically have a building at the end of the day, you know, imagine an office building, an apartment building, you know, a great research facility, and it produces a certain amount of revenue, and therefore a certain amount of value. And in an ideal world, right, it costs a lot less to build that building than what it's worth at the end of the day. You know, accounting for all of the different types of things that it takes to build it. And that delta, you know, is we would characterize as land value. You know, for a group like yourselves, you know, there's a couple of different ways to think about land value, right? Land value is partially, you know, going to help cover some of those infrastructure costs that we talked about, you know, that creates the land value. And part of it's going to go to funding the organization, it's going to go to the state, it's going to go to other public goals for the site. You know, Steve at one point called this a design fund, right? You know, it could be a design fund, it could be, you know, a public fund or a public priority fund, you know, whatever term we think is helpful there. You know, and we're going to start to think about, okay, so when we build that up and we think about what we really got here and how it might vary, you know, some different ways of understanding, you know, how we like those scenarios, right? You know, what do we think? How do they measure up for us? And, you know, how we might impact, you know, some of those outcomes. And so rather than lecturing you on theory, I might just show you an example from another project. You know, this is a little bit smaller site. I think it was a couple hundred acres. You know, but we really thought through, you know, there's a mix of potential market scenarios, right? You know, that had, you know, some variations in how many homes we would build, you know, versus how much, you know, space we might allocate to R&D or office development. You know, and what other things we might get out of it, right? Could you have a hotel site? Could you have recreation? You know, and the implications for how long you might be building, you know, versus, you know, how much recurring cash flow or, you know, or upfront cash flow you might generate. And so this is something that, you know, we can start to put together as we start to think about the land, we start to think about the market. You know, there's a range of outcomes, right? And, you know, that eventually feeds into this question of, well, you know, how much cash is that, right? Like, how do we generate money from the land? And each of these scenarios, you know, with different uses, acts a little bit differently. You know, and these are all on the same scale, so you can kind of just visually compare, you know, without worrying about anything. But you can see there's some costs up front, right? There's these actual negative numbers at the very beginning. You know, and there's some, you know, scenarios where you get a lot of cash early, but not as much over the long term. And there's some scenarios where it takes a really long time for you to kind of build up the cash flow, but actually the long-term cash flow is really high. You know, and you can see that when you think about the cumulative numbers too. So these are just some of the things that we'll start to introduce when we really get into the meat of some of how this business plan might work and how some of these different scenarios play out. And, you know, you can see that, they actually all end up in somewhat of a similar area, but they take a lot of different paths to get there. And so one of the things that, this is how we thought through the evaluation, for this particular site and client. We will come up with, with your help, some evaluation metrics that, really start to tell the story for this site and how we want to think about the things that matter to us. For this client, that design fund or that public priorities fund, they were calling it endowment value. This was actually a community college that had some land, so endowment was like a term that was familiar to them. In terms of thinking about, what does this really generate for them? And the reality was that, it actually wasn't that different across the board, right? They kind of ended up somewhere in the $50 to $60 million bucket, regardless of which version, which scenario they did. But there was a lot of variance in the recurring cash flow, right? How much, money they were getting over time based on, mostly on whether they were leasing the property or selling it. And there was a big difference when you started to grade out some of these other things on, how involved were they going to need to be? How much risk were they taking on? How quickly did they build out the site? And so, this is, I think, a good example of how there isn't really a right answer, right? None of these were wrong answers and none of these were right answers for this particular, group and this particular site. So it's kind of about finding the answer that fits on, the most criteria that, that it can, and the ones that are really important to us, and thinking about what we're willing to trade off, to make sure we achieve the things that we really care about. And so just thinking a little bit about, how we might start to do that for this site. There's some of those financial factors like, what we just, discussed in terms of cash flow. There's how long do we want to be building out the site? And we've heard from a lot of you and a lot of others on the work groups that, we're okay with the idea that this is long-term build out. Then we might come up with some cool factors on how to measure things like economic impact or social impact or, or environmental impact. And, there might be, I think there's many other ideas that, might go on this list, but I think this will help us start to think about, which direction, really makes sense for Pamsla as an organization and for the point. And then, once we have a sense of, what that fund actually looks like, how do we want to use it, right? How do we think about and evaluate the different, goals that we have that we'd like to achieve and that money can help us achieve. And, I can almost guarantee you guys, based on, when we've done this with other clients, that you will have more goals that cost more money than the amount of money we're going to generate. So we're going to have to think about, which things we really care about and which things are nice to have, but may not necessarily be, the defining feature, of this development in this group. And I'm sure we'll come up with ideas that we haven't thought of yet, and, we'll probably come up with metrics that we haven't thought of yet either. But I just wanted to kind of introduce the idea that this is where we're going. And, I think we can use this as we get, interest from other groups, right? If a business comes to us and says they really want to locate here, it's like, okay, well, we can have some really clear metrics to help evaluate, whether that's a good fit for us, and especially if they're asking for something, maybe they're asking for us to give them the land instead of buying it or leasing it from us. Is that a good deal for us, right? Does it get us something else that we really care about? And so that's, I will, leave it there for you all, but I'm happy to, take any questions or comments as, people process this.
Thanks, Erin. Any questions? Let me just say, and we'll move on. Erin, we appreciate your help. This is an ongoing discussion. This having you here and regularly reminding us of some decisions that we're going to have to make along the way are really important. The last point you made reminded me of the time I helped design our first new home, and I had a list of some great things, and then at some point along the way, reality sets in. And so I hope you all caught what Erin was saying at the end, and that is we have some wonderful aspirational goals for the project, but at some point, reality may set in and we may have to make some hard choices. So thank you, Erin. Any other comments or questions? All right. Let's go to the next item. Muriel, we're not going to leave you at the end of the agenda next time. I want you to know that.
Okay.
But we appreciate you being here and would love to hear your report on our communications progress.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you, Chairman Snow. I will be brief because I know we are nearing the end of our meeting time and Alan also has an update. So I'll just take 5 minutes of your time to briefly update you on our communications efforts. So the press conference, as Representative Snow mentioned, we had our public launch and many of you were there. So thank you so much for coming. And several of you also spoke at that. So Representative Snow, Lieutenant Governor Cox, Alan Matheson and Mayor Walker. So we had about 100 attendees at the press conference, so very well attended. And we received extensive media coverage across all major platforms here in Utah. This is just a representative sampling of the outlets that covered us. And some of our headlines, overwhelmingly positive, which is what we want right out of the gate. We really were able to essentially launch the name of the point and to start to establish some name recognition with the public. As was mentioned, we launched our public survey, and I'll talk a little bit about that here shortly. Wanted to briefly mention that we are tracking some analytics. So thank you for adopting the website policy. That just really helps to ensure that we've got that stated policy on our website very transparently for visitors of the site to know how we're using any data that comes through the site. This, as you will recall, you approved our communications plan, and as part of that were measurable objectives, quantitative ways that we can track and measure our progress with our communications efforts. So thank goodness in this day and age, we have ways to do that. We have the website analytics, social media, as well as the quantitative data that comes with our e-newsletters we send monthly. You'll see, Representative Snow, one of the posts we did about your quote from the press conference on Twitter was one of our top performing posts. We've got this dashboard, and like I say, we're producing it monthly just to kind of keep track and measure success, and also to align our efforts with a data-driven approach. We can make that available too if you guys are interested in seeing that over time. I did just want to highlight a few things. We're new, and so the percentage change is really something that we'll notice more so over time as people follow us, they like us on Facebook, follow our posts on Instagrams, retweet us on Twitter, that kind of thing. So generally speaking, I think for an entity like us, we're in a good spot with our social media analytics right out of the gate. We also have nearly 1,000 views on our YouTube channel just in the past 28 days. A lot of that was attributable to the press conference, which we live streamed on both Facebook and YouTube. And we have all of our videos of our working group meetings and now our board meetings live streamed, and the recordings are posted after the fact on the channel. Website, we took that opportunity just a few weeks ago to launch the website as well. And I think the one metric to note here is the traffic source. We're able to track the visitors, and specifically that 71% referral rate. Most of the people, what essentially that means is that those were people who came to our website by clicking on an external source that linked to us. And by and large, those came from the earned media coverage we got in the various outlets. So people were really paying attention to that coverage, and that an article, for example, would link to our website, someone would click on that link and get to us. Our e-newsletter, I would say I would like to see more people open our newsletter, but it was the first one. So we'll continue to and try and get those numbers up. 266 people opening the newsletter when you have just about 1,000 subscribers is an okay metric, but I would again like to increase that. So make the point, the public survey. It is still open. We were essentially asking people, as you know, to help us make the point by making their point and providing their opinion through the survey. I wanted to provide just a few high-level interim results. We have received so far 2,363 responses. So a good response rate. We really wanted to not reinvent the wheel and really build on the visioning work that had already been done. So the way that we structured the questions in the survey format were pulling from what the public already told us they wanted in the preferred scenario established for the regional vision. So 3 main sections in the survey. The first was site attributes, and we asked how important was it that the point had the following attributes. Again, the survey is still open till Friday, so this could potentially change, but I don't anticipate it to change much, if at all, given our high response rate so far. So you'll see here that the majority of people, when asked on a 1 to 5 Likert scale, indicated that parks, playgrounds, and open space was their most important site attribute for us to consider. In terms of development objectives, what we were hoping to achieve with future development at the site. Again, interim survey results, which you can see here on that 1 to 5 scale, that what popped out was promoting quality of life, and then also parks, trails, and open space. And then approaches to development, things that we're keeping top of mind. I think it's very apropos to the conversation that we just had when the board adopted the compact, because this is something that the public, when it comes to improving air quality, says that they want. Again, on that 1 to 5 Likert scale, improving air quality really came out on top, although I will say that these other attributes also did as well. It's hard to say, one is more important than the other when they are all really good, attributes to achieve. And that's all I have. So I just wanted to be really quick. Does anyone have any questions?
Questions for Muriel? Anyone? Excellent, Muriel. Very interesting survey results, and it's part of, again, part of our charge, I think, as our board is trying to see if we can't incorporate much of that into our ultimate plan. So thank you, and I'm assuming that we will have regular updates from you as this process goes on. By the way, if any of you have not become followers on Facebook and on Twitter, there's still some openings, I understand, Muriel.
If there's still an opportunity to do that, please, please, please like our page, follow us on Twitter.
So please join and be generous with your likes. Okay, Alan, I'll stop talking and we'll turn the time to you to help wrap us up here.
Well, thank you, Representative. And in the interest of time, I'm going to talk about just one thing, and it's kind of a preview for our next meeting and getting a little bit of input from you on that. Many state agencies have fee schedules, and in some cases, it's well over 100 different fees that they charge for various services that they provide to the public. Sometimes it's permits, licenses, copies, etc. Those fees are often approved by the legislature. It's a way of recapturing the costs of providing those services, but also doing it in a way that doesn't unduly burden the public to access government services. It seems that it might be a good idea for us to have a fee schedule. Ours would be pretty simple and does not require legislative approval. But if people ask for records, copies of documents that we've prepared, etc., it seems to make sense for us to have a set cost for those copies, a set cost for the time to gather documents, so that everything's above board, well known in advance, and consistent. So with your approval, I'd suggest that we put together a fee schedule that goes out to the public for comment. I'd be surprised if anybody comments. I know when I was at DEQ, we'd have the requirement to post the fee schedule and have a public hearing, and no one ever showed up. but it's an important step. And then present that for board approval at our next meeting. As I've talked to Cameron at GoEd and JC, and we've thought that there really aren't that many fees that we would charge. Think a cost for copies. If you've got unusually sized copies, that might be a little bit more expensive. And then cost of staff time to respond to a government records request and putting the records together. I would suggest that for the copies, that's pretty easy. We can look at what other agencies have done, and we have done that. And we would propose a cost that's kind of average for other state agencies. Think on the order of 25 or 30 cents a copy. And then for unusually sized copies, something more than that. The more difficult question is what to charge for staff time in responding to requests for records. I think under the statute, the first 15 minutes is free, but after that, agencies or state entities are allowed to recoup their costs. And it's typically the cost of the lowest cost employee that is able to meet the request. Well, we've got an unusual situation where I'm the only employee, and my hourly rate's a little higher than the clerical employees that might respond at other agencies. So charging my hourly rate would probably be viewed as being inconsistent with public policy of making records available. Yet at the same time, if I'm having to spend an awful lot of time responding to government records requests, that's not efficient for the organization. So haven't established a particular number, but my sense would be to charge a fraction of my hourly rate, enough not to cover nearly all of the costs, but at least a pretty good chunk of those costs, but still make the service available to members of the public seeking records. So that's my proposal. I know I'm not talking specifics now, but I would suggest that I put more detail together. We've got a draft already. I'd hold a public hearing and see if there are any public comments, and then bring the proposed fee schedule back at our next meeting for your approval. So just curious if there's any feedback on any of that.
Any questions for Alan? Comments? Any objections?
I have a quick question. Let's say that it's not a lot of time right now and Alan can satisfy any requests for information, but what happens if it scales all of a sudden, or there's like a lot of requests? Can we amend the rates or change things later on?
We certainly can change it over time, and if we add staff, that would change the rate and our ability to respond. So far, we haven't had requests under the Government Records Management Act, but I know other entities have spent a good chunk of their time responding to records requests, and it does take away from the work. So yes, we can be flexible. Yes, we can change it in the future.
Thanks, April, for the question. Other questions? Let me ask, any objection to our director proceeding as he's laid out? I think you have our support, Alan, moving forward.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, we come to that time of our meeting, the end. So let me just say again, thank you very much for being here, and our consultants, thanks for your input. Alan, thank you for your ongoing guidance. We appreciate all you do. With that, we'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
If nobody else will, I'll make the motion that we adjourn.
Thank you, Jim. And do we have a second? Representative Handy?
Second from me. Thank you.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We stand adjourned. Thank you again. Bye. Bye, everyone.